He's still ready to go. He's ready to do another deal right after this. You know, we were in Center yesterday. We drew a big crowd over there. We were in Nacogdoches, drew a big crowd over there. And we were in Carthage this morning, and we're in Lufkin at 1, and now we're here. So this is our third stop today. And it's just been incredible to see all the people coming out and all the people excited about a potential candidacy from Representative Beto O'Rourke. You know, so we're waiting patiently. What he's going to do. I've had people come in, what is he going to do? I said, I don't know. You know, he hadn't told me. He hadn't told his chief of staff. So if he does know, he's keeping it close to the vest. So we're just waiting. Whether you run or not, brother, man, we're for you 100%. 100%. But I tell you, the thing that makes me excited about Representative Beto is this. You know, back when I was in college, 1988 was the last time that we elected anybody that was of the color of blue to the Congress or to the Senate. It's been a real, real long time. So Texas has been out of play for people in blue for the last 30-something years, almost 40 years. No matter what office, whether it was for Senate, whether it was for Agriculture Commissioner, Governor, Lieutenant Governor, any of those posts. But in 2018, 2016, along comes Beto. And finally, after all these years, he has put Texas in play. And the key to this is to get out there and register people, turn people out. If your family's not registered, get them registered. If your children aren't registered, get them registered. If your friends aren't registered, get them registered. But it's not enough just to register. After you register, you got to go vote. And then after you vote that one time, you got to keep on voting. What you got? We got city council races. We got county commissioners races. We got county judge races. We got constable races. We got all kind of races that you have to turn out to vote to every single time. Not just the big ones, just not the big ones. Not just Senate or governor, but these little races too. They matter. They matter. Because, guys, as you can see, it's all about power for the people who are up in Austin these days. It's not about what's right. It's not about what's wrong. It's not about what's nice. It's not about what's compassionate. It's about raw power. Amen. If I want to do something, I got the power to do it, whether it's right or wrong, I'm going to do it. So how do you counter people who don't have any type of regard for what's right or wrong or for compassion, but they're going to do what they want to do because they got the power to do it? How do you counter that? You counter that with power. And it's power in the vote. It's power in the vote. You know, I was reading a book, you know, a theology student. They said politics is how you make compassion permanent. So it's not about using the power to get your way, or to do something right, or to do something wrong, or to do something just because you want it. You use power because power is compassion, is service oriented. It's in the service of the people. That's why we want power. Not because we're afraid, not because we're fearful, not because we're running around not afraid about what the future holds. You use power and exercise power because it's compassionate. It's always used in the service of other people and never in your own service. It's always for something else. And that's why I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful about the candidacy of Beto. I'm hopeful about the candidacy of other people who are running for statewide office. And I'm just so glad. I saw Mr. Beto here a couple of years ago at the Democratic debate in Houston, and I said, hey, you got to get to East Texas. You got to come to East Texas because there's a whole lot of people here waiting for you. You know, and particularly the thing that I really talked to him about was, you're going to be shocked and surprised to hear what I'm fixing to say, but it's true. You got to access the trail ride scene. If you don't know what the trail ride scene is, you need to find out what it is. The trail ride scene is a black cowboy scene that meets every weekend in pastures all over the East Texas in multiple places. And if you go there, you're going to see 2, 3, 4, 5,000 people from the ages of 18 to 30 every week in multiple places. And I said, those are voters who are ready to be accessed. And we have to go to them and say, hey, register to vote. So one of the things that we're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be attending those trail rides. And I hope I can get many of you to join with me as volunteers to go register many of these young people to vote. Because therein, the power of the young people is the power of the United States. Now, maybe you thought I would have said the power of Texas. But the future of the United States, and this is a true statement. If you don't believe me, you ask Georgia. But we're more powerful than Georgia because we got more people. Right?
Yeah.
But the future of the United States runs through Texas as it runs through East Texas.
That's it.
You win East Texas, you win the country. Come on up here, Mr. O'Rourke.
That's a true story about meeting Reverend Miller and having this conversation about East Texas and remembering the times that I've been with you, especially in 2017 and 2018 when I was campaigning and coming to towns that I'd never heard of before, like Carthage, Texas, and Henderson, Texas. And I'm ashamed to admit it because I'm here in Henderson, Texas right now, but I didn't know you existed until I came out in 2017 and 2018. Because you cannot find two cities further apart and still in the same state than Henderson and El Paso. We're in another time zone. It's an hour earlier there right now. We're in the Chihuahuan Desert. We're in the Rocky Mountains. We are closer to the capitals of the states of New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, and the state of Chihuahua than we are to our own capital in Austin, which is 8.5 hours away. So we didn't really get to see much of the rest of Texas. And when I heard folks talking about East Texas, I always thought they were talking about Lubbock, or maybe Midlands, but I didn't know that you could go this far east. 12 hours driving, and you end up in Henderson. But when we were here last, you all were so kind, and so warm, and so welcoming, and you made me feel at home, even though it's a very different looking place than my home in El Paso. And I found that what connects us and what unites us is far more important, far deeper, far more powerful, far more profound than what might divide us or separate us based on geography or really anything else, any of these other meaningless differences upon which they try to keep us separated in this state. That was for me the big lesson of 2018. And you know, I didn't win. I didn't defeat Ted Cruz. We came really close, 2.5 points. But when we all organized in that way, and when we showed up in each of the 254 counties, including in Rusk, including in El Paso, we produced the largest turnout that Texas had seen in a midterm since 1970. And we also saw young voters. You know, everyone's always asking, how do we get young people to vote? Well, you show up where young people are. We went to high schools, we went to colleges, went to junior colleges, went to the great HBCUs of Texas. And though people on my own campaign said this is a waste of time, young people don't vote. You've got limited resources and limited minutes to spend on the campaign trail. Don't waste them on young people. Only spend them with those who have a track record of voting in 10 of the last 10 elections. And there's a logic to that, right? But there's a countervailing logic that says, I might not show up to vote either if no one ever came to my school or where I'm at and listened to me about what's most important in my life and then reflected that back in their campaign. That's what we all did together. Young voter turnout of 500%. And though we didn't win our race, 12 new Democratic state house representatives replacing 12 Republican state house representatives, 2 new Democrats in Congress replacing 2 old Republicans in Congress, and in one county alone, Harris County. Yeah. In Harris County, 17 African-American women were elected to judicial positions. Folks talk about criminal justice reform. That's criminal justice reform right there. That's changing the face of criminal justice in the most diverse community in the country, bar none. That's the way to do it. That's the way that we did it. And so I want to echo what Reverend Miller said, the importance of registering and voting, and then going beyond that, engaging with, talking to, and importantly, listening to one another. That's how we bring each other in. In 2020, we as Democrats, and I'm not going to assume everyone here is a Democrat, but I am, we as Democrats didn't do so well. We got our I've been told not to swear in this hall, and so we didn't do well. I'll just leave it there. We only were 9 House seats down from taking a majority in the state House, and we didn't pick up a net gain in seats. We didn't pick up any of the congressional districts that we thought we can compete in and win. We didn't beat John Cornyn. Those of us who were Democrats thought we might be able to do all of those things. And I'll tell you a big problem, a big challenge that we had is that we Democrats, for the most part, probably there are some exceptions, stayed home. And we had a good excuse. There was a pandemic. I mean, 50,000 people died in that pandemic just in the state of Texas. In my hometown of El Paso, once last summer, Greg Abbott, our governor, stopped dropping the public health guidelines and mandates. We became the deadliest city in the country, bar none. So many people died in El Paso so quickly, they opened up not 1, but 10 mobile morgues. They had to call in the guard to move the bodies because so many were dying so quickly. We lost a really good friend, Javier Diaz, served in the Korean War, was at the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir. A guy I got to know as I was coming up in El Paso, just a world-class human being. He and his wife Terry became good friends. We'd eat dinner at their house, they'd have dinner at ours. This guy and Terry, his wife, both got COVID at the same time. We're staying in separate hospital rooms, couldn't see each other. Javier, who does not have a cell phone and for whom there was no way to get in touch with him when he was in the hospital because the hospital was overflowing as well. And they ran out of the normal rooms where they have things like TVs and telephones, and he was probably in some back storage area or excess capacity space. And that's where he died, you know, without his family, without his friends, without anybody being able to check on him, without the people who came into his room able to really see him without plastic goggles and masks and all manner of stuff that kept them separated from him. How could we, the most powerful, medically advanced, wealthiest country on the face of the planet, that the world has ever known, allow our fellow Texans to die in this way? It didn't have to be that way. I mean, the public health guidance was pretty clear. The steps that you might have to take if you're in a position of public trust were obvious. They may not be politically popular, but we don't really care about that when lives are on the line. I'm thinking about all this because I keep reading in the news that our governor, who presided over that misguided response to the pandemic, is now going to spend $250 million of your dollars and my dollars building a wall on the southern border. Now, I live on the border. From my front porch in Sunset Heights, I can see my neighbors' homes in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. We are connected. We are a binational community of about 3 million people. We speak English, we speak Spanish. Our street grids run into each other. When you see us from outer space, next time you're up there, it just looks like one community as you look down from the sky. He wants to build a wall in that community. For what reason? There are kids, there are young families, there are 20-year-old moms and dads who've just traveled 2,000 miles from some of the deadliest countries on the face of the planet that have been absolutely ravaged by historic droughts and by devastating storms. Not necessarily caused by God, but by you and by me, by our emissions, our excesses, our inaction in the face of the facts and the science and the consequences. Civil society in these countries has been hollowed out due to the demand for illegal drugs in this country and the drug control policy that we force on their countries, militarizing their police forces. I mean, think about it, for those of you who have kids or have had kids or in fact are kids. What would cause you to send your little girl on a 2,000-mile journey without you, unattended, unaccompanied? You don't do it for kicks, you don't do it to steal a job, you don't do it to take benefits from somebody else, you don't do it for a free ride or a free lunch. The only way that we'd send Molly, my 12-year-old, on a 2,000-mile journey is if to stay with us would mean death. And that's what I'm hearing from these families as I listen to them. Only those extraordinary circumstances could produce those extraordinary responses. And so no wall keeps out that level of misery. No wall is going to address the root causes of those problems in those countries. That's going to take some leadership. And I would like our current president to do more on that front. I've been grateful for what he's done thus far, but I wanted to make Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador his #1 foreign policy priority. So we addressed the causes that would force someone to flee that distance, put their lives at risk, and come to our front door right here in Texas. But I don't want a wall, especially one that costs $250 million when we have real needs here. But don't worry, Greg Abbott is going to crowdsource the rest of the money necessary to complete the wall. He's going to ask you for a donation to complement the tax dollars that you've already submitted to the state of Texas. I'll tell you about crowdsourcing and crowdfunding. When the energy capital of North America, the state of Texas, which we should be proud of. I mean, we lessened our dependence on the Middle East, on Venezuela, on other parts of the world. There are no reasons to go to war for energy and oil anymore. Not that we ever should have, but there's no reason to do that, in large part because of Texas. We are powering this country, this continent, and now, frankly, so much of the rest of the world. And yet, in Texas, we got hit by a cold snap in February, and the power went out, literally. Lights didn't go on, water didn't run because the pipes froze, the heat wouldn't kick on. And people were miserable. They were cold, they were going without water, and they died. More than 700 Texans, including children, who froze to death in their beds, did not survive. Again, not a God-made disaster, not Mother Nature, but caused by man, by the men who are in the most powerful positions in this state. So I'll tell you about crowdsourcing and crowdfunding. We have a group called Powered by People. Some of you are members of it, and I'm grateful for it. All volunteers. We set up a phone bank. We used to use these to call voters before elections to get them to vote for our candidates. We use those phone banks and thousands of volunteers who came onto those phone banks to call every senior citizen in every affected county for whom we could obtain a cell phone or a home telephone number. We made over 1 million phone calls, and we connected those seniors with water, with food, with warming centers, and with transportation. I was just in Midland at a meeting just like this one. This woman came up. She lives in Snyder, Texas, and she drove from Snyder to Midland, and she said, "Thank you for setting up that phone bank so I could call those senior citizens." We talked to one woman who had not had water, heat, or light for 2 days. My husband and I pitched in on a hotel room, and she stayed on our dime for a week. And I was grateful to do it, she said. Stories like that all over the state. Government wasn't going to do it, so the people, to quote Reverend Miller, the power of the people, we were going to do it. We then asked for donations, and many of you sent in your $5, your $10, your $250. Again, for that, I'm grateful. We raised $1.4 million, and we immediately began dispersing it to every affected community we could reach. When your pipes froze and then burst when it warmed up and it destroyed your floor and your walls and the mold was racing up your ceiling and you couldn't afford to pay for it, it wasn't your fault in the first place and you shouldn't have to, all of us kicked in. So if the governor's looking for examples of crowdfunding and crowdsourcing, we can give him those examples right here in Texas. That's what all of us decided to do when our government failed us. And there's this final threat that I want to share with you, and then I want to give you some action, because action is hope, and action is the antidote to despair, and action is what we need. That's what's got me on the road for now going on 3 weeks, traveling from one town to another. It's not just because I got sick of my wife and my wife got sick of me over the last year and we were cooped up in the same house together. It was because I need to be out here with you, and I think we all need each other and to be together right now. You all have been reading about, probably following closely, these elections bills that have been introduced in the last legislative session in Texas. They propose to take a state that is already the toughest in which to vote in the country, bar none. Go anywhere else and it's easier to cast a ballot, and it's easier to register to vote. In Texas, no online voter registration in the year of our Lord, 2021. Although I can do anything else I want to, from ordering tacos to renting movies to finding a date tonight if I weren't already married online. But I can't register to vote. You can in almost every other state in the union. In the last 8 years, 750 polling places have been closed in this state. And they're not just closed anywhere. They're closed in the fastest growing Black and Latino neighborhoods in this state. So when you see pictures from Houston, and at the historically Black college, the Texas Southern University, you see a line to vote 6 hours long, part of you wells up with pride. Man, they were waiting to wait 6 hours in order to vote. That person's my hero. But really, we should be filled with shame. Why did we close all the polling places around TSU and force all the residents into only one, where they have to wait 6 hours? And for every person standing in that line willing to wait, how many couldn't? Because they're working 2 jobs, or they have 3 kids at home, or they're only paid $7.25 an hour, so their shift gets off at 2 a.m., and they're just not going to have that chance to participate in our politics or our elections. We have a gerrymander of our congressional districts that a 3-judge federal panel described as a racial gerrymander, meaning based on the color of your skin, you were likely drawn out of a congressional district to diminish the power and the likelihood of your vote. You were drawn out effectively of your democracy. Not me saying it, 3 federal judges. That was their conclusion and their words. And a voter ID law. And look, I was asked by the Republican Party chairwoman in Rains County, who surprisingly enough came to our meeting, a meeting just like this one, and she said, Beto, what do you have against ID? I need an ID to drive. I need an ID to open a checking account. I need an ID when I go across the state line and gamble at a casino. I need an ID to board a plane. What do you have against an ID to vote? And I surprised her because I said, you know, I'm not so sure that I'm against having to prove your identity in order to vote, but I want to share with you, because maybe you don't know, that the forms of ID that we accept at the polling place don't work for everyone. I mean, yes, I have a driver's license, no sweat off my back to present it. But your 85, 95-year-old grandmother may not have one because she does not drive anymore. She may not have a state-sponsored ID that works at the polling place. And so she may not be able to vote because she doesn't have a legal form of identity. That student at Wiley College, she can't use her student ID to prove her identity at the ballot box, but that guy who has a license to carry a firearm, that's a valid ID at the ballot box. So I said to this county party chairwoman, what if we just expanded the acceptable forms of ID, or defrayed the expenses? Because a woman who had significant disabilities said, you know, I can't drive because of my disability, so I don't have a driver's license. And because I can't drive, it's hard to get around. And because it's hard to get around, it's hard to go to a office that issues a state-sponsored ID. And if I could get there, it would cost me $120, and I don't have $120. And so I said, what if we let her do this online? And what if we covered the cost for it? And the Republican Party chairwoman was nodding her head. Yeah, I agree with that. I think we can find some common ground. But that's the situation in Texas today, the hardest state in which to vote. And what they want to do on top of that in this bill called SB 7, no more Sunday morning voting, which is narrowly, laserly focused on African American voters and programs like Souls to the Polls. They want to allow partisan poll watchers free reign in the polling place. So any jerk could walk into that polling place and intimidate any voter. And if you think this is hypothetical, I was in Washington County, kind of when we're Monday. I was in Washington County Monday, Brenham, Texas. You all may or may not be familiar with it. And 200 folks, just like this gathering, came together in a public park. It was beautiful. Cross-section of the community, talking about what we're talking about today. However, 20 people showed up to protest and to shout us down and intimidate us with AR-15s and AK-47s slung over their backs. Now, these are weapons that were originally designed and engineered to take our U.S. service members into battle, because that high-impact, high-velocity round, when it hits your system, it destroys everything inside. You will bleed out before you can get up. That's what we want from that weapon, because it's really good on the battlefield. And I don't want that enemy soldier getting back up and shooting at our soldier. But I sure as heck don't want someone coming to a political event and intimidating us and saying, don't say that or else. You don't have to shoot someone to be a terrorist. But you can be a terrorist and also shoot people, as we saw at the Walmart in El Paso 2 years ago, August 3rd, when 23 people were killed by someone who, you know what, folks, said he came to repel an Hispanic invasion of Texas. He said Hispanics are taking over our politics in Texas. That was political terrorism, just like the terrorists who invaded the Capitol on the 6th of January. So, jerks like that could come into the polling place, and election judges would have no authority, no recourse to kick them out. In fact, the law would work against them. They could be arrested and have a conviction on their record for trying to take out a partisan poll watcher. But most alarmingly are these next 2 provisions. One, if you have a disability, and have a hard time voting and want an absentee ballot, and millions of Texans have requested one of those, no questions asked. We take your word for it because we should, because election fraud runs at a rate of 0.000004% in Texas. You are more likely to be struck by lightning than to ever encounter election fraud in the state. But nonetheless, if you have a disability now under SB 7, you must prove it. Get a note from the doctor in the least insured state in the country. Or you came back from Vietnam, you came back from Afghanistan, you came back from Iraq with traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress disorder, military sexual trauma, traumatic amputation from a roadside IED. You have to prove that to us now. Get a letter from the VA, send that in, and then we'll send you the absentee ballot. And then this kicker right here at the end. Texas, under SB 7, reserves the right to overturn any election based simply on the allegation of fraud. Messed up. Because the former president, the immediate former president, and those who still traffic in his lies and conspiracy theories, even though they're in sworn positions of public trust, including our junior senator, have tried to overturn elections based on the lie that there was fraud. They did it in Pennsylvania, they tried to do it in Michigan, they tried to do it in Georgia, and they tried to do it in Arizona. And guess where the fraud was centered in those 4 states, according to them? In Detroit, in Atlanta, in Philadelphia, in Phoenix, all communities of color, the first 3, overwhelming turnout by black voters that propelled the Electoral College victory of Joe Biden, and in the 4th, Mexican-American voters who did the same. For some reason, they're all committing fraud in the eyes of the president and the tens of millions who believe them. What if Texas had on the books a statute that said, black and white by law, if you don't like the election, cry fraud and overturn it. Doesn't matter who got the most votes. That's exactly what was written in that bill that almost passed, but for the House Democrats walking out at the 11th hour. That, ladies and gentlemen, that is the threat that we face at this minute. This beautiful, imperfect democracy that we have, that is the exception in world history and absolutely unique on planet Earth today. I'm not saying it's perfect, but men and women have given their lives for it. A week ago, 77 years, those men landed on the beaches of Normandy and willingly died for democracy to fight fascism and tyranny. 58 years ago last week, Medgar Evers was shot in front of his home in Jackson, Mississippi for trying to register voters to participate in elections. Whether they wore the uniform or were civil rights leaders, they willingly put their lives on the line and so often lost them so we could have this democracy, which we are about to lose right now at this moment if we do not stand up to be counted and save it. So here's where the hope comes in the form of action that I propose. 1, there will likely be a special session. There will certainly be a special session. It could come in a couple of weeks. It could come in a couple of months. When it comes, the governor's likely to propose another election tampering bill or voter fraud bill or voter suppression bill. Choose your phrase. And it will be just as bad or worse than the one I just described. One new idea is that they'll purge voters from the rolls by the hundreds of thousands, just as they did in Georgia prior to Stacey Abrams becoming a candidate for governor in 2018. And but for that purge, she would be the governor of that state at this moment. They're going to try that in Texas. So call your state rep. Call your state senator. You think it's a waste of breath and time? It's not. So many of those Republicans who voted for that bill that I just described are now disavowing provisions within it. I didn't know that they were going to get rid of Sunday morning voting. I'm sorry, I didn't read that in there. I wouldn't have voted for it if I'd known that. I didn't know that we were going to be able to overturn elections. That's horrendous. That was the wording that one Republican state rep used for that bill. So those calls coming out to their town hall meetings, if they hold town hall meetings, getting in their face peacefully and nonviolently, that's the way to do it. And also, if you have some time, call those Democratic state reps and tell them you appreciate them. You have their back for whatever it is they need to do in that special session. That's number 1. And related to 1, if you have the chance, we're going to be rallying this Sunday. And I know it's Sunday, I know it's Father's Day, and I know it's summer, I know it's hot, but think about the sacrifices that have preceded us. This Sunday at the at the Capitol in Austin on the steps. We want to hold the largest voting rights rally in Texas history and want you to be part of it. That's how you make change, right? The calls help, the emails help, the Twitter helps, the Facebook helps. Your presence is profound in terms of how it helps. Second, there is a bill that would cure this threat that is now pending before the United States Senate. It has passed the U.S. House of Representatives. President Biden has indicated he would sign it if it landed on his desk. It's called the For the People Act. It would make voter registration automatic and allow you to same-day voter register if you just moved to Texas from Louisiana or Arkansas or Oklahoma and didn't have a chance to update your address before you walked into the ballot box. You can update it right there. Number two, it would reduce the power of big money, corporate money in our politics. Follow the money to Greg Abbott from the energy industries and the electricity industries. One donor alone in the Permian Basin gave Greg Abbott more than $1 million. Now tell me that didn't affect who he appointed to the Public Utility Commission that oversees ERCOT, that is supposed to manage the electricity grid that absolutely, abjectly failed us in February. Well, this bill begins to address that. It removes obstacles and barriers in the way for voters right now in Texas and Georgia and Florida and every other state for that matter in the country. It makes Election Day a national holiday. And then this practice we have in Texas whereby members of Congress choose their voters instead of the other way around, it ends gerrymandering and replaces it with an independent redistricting commission. No politicians, D's or R's, allowed in the room. We draw lines that are fair. Nobody's drawn in or out based on race or ethnicity or any of that stuff. So we can get that passed. And though sometimes the prospects look dim, and there are some folks who will tell you the sky is falling when it comes to this one, that's exactly what they were saying in 1964 and 1965 when the Voting Rights Act of that year was before LBJ. And in fact, President Johnson is to have said to Dr. King and Andrew Young when they met with him in his office, I don't have the power to get this passed. Those Southern Democrats, when there still were Southern Democrats, they'll never vote for voting rights in the South. And Dr. King said, well, how do we call this a democracy? If in one county alone in Mississippi, 95% of the population is African American, and there's not a single black voter on the rolls. And so they left because the president said he didn't have the power. And Dr. King told Andrew Young, we got to go out there and get him some power. And they did. They rallied at the state capitals. They marched. They lit up the phone lines. They forced the issue. They found some power. And John Lewis, the next year, 1965, March 8th, he starts a march from Selma to Montgomery to give the president some power and to get himself and others and generations that are still alive today some democracy. And we know how that ended. Before he could cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge, he was beaten within an inch of his life. One person died during that march, and it's a week and a day later that Johnson convenes a joint session of Congress, and he says, what happened in Selma last week should not make us proud. And in fact, it should compel us to act, because all they wanted in Selma, all these civil rights and voting rights activists want, is the right to vote. And you, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate and the House, have the power to confer it. So let's get after it and let's do it. It was a longer speech than that, but that's my cliff notes for it. He had, in other words, found the power. The conscience of the country had been shocked. Those members of Congress were compelled to act, and act they did, regardless of the political consequences. And that bill passed, and it ushered in the first multiracial democracy in this country's history, except for that brief window after the Civil War and before the end of Reconstruction. And it is exactly that multiracial democracy that is under attack across this country. I wind up this ask to plead with you to call President Biden and to tell him that he's got the power to do this and you want him to use it. Get that through the Senate, Mr. President. They begin voting on it this next week. In fact, I think the first vote is scheduled for Tuesday of this next week on the For the People Act. So make that call, or show up at the state capitol on Sunday, where I'm sure if enough of us are there, President Biden will see the images and get the message. Last one, and then I'll close. This is our insurance policy, okay? Because we need one, because there's a chance that we won't stop the next version of voter suppression in Texas. And what is already a tough and bad and very difficult situation gets even worse. There's the prospect that President Biden doesn't find that power. And there are not enough of us who give it to him. And for the people, voting rights legislation does not pass. And so what do? To give up?
would be the death of this democracy for sure, and we can't have that. So we get certified to become volunteer deputy registrars. It's called a VDR. And I think it's a peculiarity of Texas where it tried to make it hard on the people of the state to register and to prevent those who did live in this state from flying down here and registering people who should be able to register to vote. So you got to go to your county courthouse in the county in which you live, in which you're already registered to vote, if you've never been a VDR before. Go into that elections department and say, I would like to be a VDR, a volunteer deputy registrar. And they'll give you a quick lesson. Sometimes local elections departments allow you to take this lesson online. They'll give you a quick quiz or a test. Sometimes you can do that online as well. And then they certify you. And I've done this in many different counties, because once you do it in your home county, you can go to other counties and get a reciprocal certification. And I've got, Cynthia, 15 of these reciprocal certificates. Sometimes they make you raise your hand. Sometimes they give you a certificate with a gold seal on it. Sometimes they just give you a pat on the back. In whatever case, you are now street legal in Rusk County to begin registering people to vote. You can knock on your neighbor's door, and I've done that, and it works. Hey, just checking to make sure everyone in the house is registered to vote. If not, it'll take me 5 minutes, and I get you signed up, and you'll have your voter registration card in the mail within a week or two. That's great, and it's a good way to get to know your neighbors. You can go to the food bank, talk to the folks who show up there, who are in line, who volunteer, who run it. Doesn't matter, the grocery store, the DMV, the bar, the church, wherever people congregate, you show up. And for the single ladies and men in the room, this is a great excuse to meet somebody attractive. You go up to them, you ask them if they're registered to vote. If they are not, that begins a longer conversation on that track. If they are, you can just talk about how great it is to be registered and maybe encourage them to become a VDR. You'll escort them down to the elections department. But there are 2 million Texans who today are eligible to vote but unregistered. That great campaign that we all ran in 2018, I only lost it by a little more than 200,000 votes. And look, I'm not complaining. The minute I knew I lost, I didn't do what our former president did. I didn't cry fraud. I didn't lie. I didn't try to inspire an insurrection. I called Senator Cruz. And I said, Senator Cruz, you ran a great race. You have won this election. Congratulations. You will be my senator going forward. I will be your constituent. If I can ever be of help, this is my cell phone number. I wish you the best. That's what we do. He gave his victory speech. I gave my concession speech. But we got really close. Despite that rigged system that I described, the polling place closures, the voter ID, the racial gerrymander, got really close despite all of that. So no matter how rigged this gets, no matter how stacked the deck, no matter how tilted the playing field, I think we can still win if we bring enough people onto the rolls. And so let's go after those 2 million. I don't know how many live here in Rusk. I don't know how many live in Angelina. I don't know how many live in Shelby. I don't know how many live in Gregg. I don't know how many live in the other 250 counties of Texas. But we can go find them. And if we are certified as VDRs, we can register them. We can talk to them. We can listen to them. And we can invite them to vote in the next election. And that's how I think we meet this challenge. And it will not be easy. And nothing worth doing ever is. And there is no certainty that we will win. In fact, the odds don't look so great right now. But we are not weak people, right? And I'll leave you with this. President Truman, when talking about how often we are asked to fear one another, fear those Mexicans, those Hispanics, those people who don't look like you, love like you, live like you, who've only been in this country for a week or who've been in this country for 7 generations. There's always some politician who's going to want to scapegoat somebody and make you afraid of them so that you'll act based on that and elect them to stop this danger, this threat that's posed by them. And Truman, at the height of the Red Scare and having faced down Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, said, America was not built on fear. Instead, we were built on courage, on imagination, and an unbeatable determination to do the job at hand. I love that last part because, courage, I think we got that. Imagination, we're going to have to be creative about how we do this. The unbeatable determination, that's what we need. That's why we're here talking in 2021 and why I'm not before you in October of 2022. We've got to be unbeatable. We've got to be determined. We've got to be after this every single day relentlessly. It's not just how we win elections, it's how we save our democracy. So I encourage you to keep the faith and to stay in this fight and to join us every step of the way. I will be with you. Thank you all for being here today. Very grateful. Enjoy this. Thank you. Thank you. We typically try to get as many voices into the conversation as possible. You can tell how long-winded I am, but because we have just a little bit of time left, we're going to try to get to as many questions or comments, and I will try to give you a very brief, I'll try on 1 or 2 sentence answers or just reflections on your comments. And then we are going to be on a program in a little bit on national TV to talk about what we're talking about here and to encourage people to come join us in Austin this Sunday. So if you raise your hand, Cynthia, right here to your left, will bring you the microphone and ask away.
All right, who's the first one? Right,
All right,
over here.
we've got somebody in the back.
I just need to know where to go to register to vote.
So if you want to register to vote, do we have a volunteer deputy registrar here? If you see there's some hands in the back, they will register you right now here in this church. Do you have your voter registration forms? Great. That's wonderful. It's like we planned that. That was really good. That was really good.
Any more questions? We'll take a look. Abby, you have a question?
Ms. Connell?
Okay. Oh. I'm looking.
Oh, I thought Reverend Miller said there was
Right
something.
here.
Oh, here we go.
Right here.
Texas still needs you. Thank you for your efforts in the state here, and for not going away and staying strong. Well, you've heard our gripes and our complaints, but we are energized by your strength to go forward, and so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Not really a question except this, and I know you remember this. Governor Abbott's going to go to the border and pitch his wall. And from what we hear, former President Trump might join him there. I distinctly remember watching you at an opposing rally in El Paso that was better done and a better turnout and a much better message. And I would just invite you to maybe consider doing the same when they go down there to the border.
Great.
Thank you for your voice.
Great idea. Thank you. I appreciate that. Now we got to meet this fear and this scapegoating and this provocation. And can I just say one thing? And I apologize. And I promised I would be brief. But I got to say this. Or my conscience won't let me be quiet on this. You know, I mentioned briefly that Walmart shooting 2 years ago, and the guy who came into that Walmart with that AK-47 was inspired by President Trump. In fact, he published a manifesto and quoted what Trump had said about invasions of Hispanics. And remember, he said he came to repel that invasion. Trump called those who were coming to this country an infestation. You have an infestation of cockroaches and you want to kill them, you want to exterminate them. You have an infestation of termites or ants or rodents. That's how we talk about animals or creatures that we don't like. It's not how we talk about human beings. And at a big rally in Florida before the El Paso shooting, Trump asked the big crowd, what are we going to do about this invasion of Mexicans, of immigrants, of brown people? And someone in the crowd said, shoot them. And everybody in the crowd laughed and cheered and applauded, and President Trump smiled and laughed with them. Our governor yesterday or the day before, and our lieutenant governor, using words like invasion, talking about taking matters, previous to the El Paso shooting, the governor talked about taking matters into our own hands. It's this rhetoric, folks. It doesn't just offend us. It's not just a spending of $250 million on a solution in search of a problem. It's going to get people killed. And so, yes, let's make sure that we get the true message and the true story and the facts out there. Sorry, sir. Please go ahead.
I think that's all right. Thanks for being here. The fact that you showed up put you out front with me already. Being an ex-parolee, I was plagued for a long time about my right to vote. There's a lot of persons still out there on the street, and I wonder if there was anyone here that could elaborate on how that right gets restored, or is it ever taken away?
Great question. I can answer that one. And then after, Cynthia, after I leave, if there are others who want to keep the conversation going, I'm just going to be in a room over here doing a quick interview. We can do that. But so that you know, if you're off paper, if you satisfy the conditions of your parole, your probation, you have no more fees or fines connected to your conviction, you're ready to go. As a returning citizen, your rights are restored, and you can register to vote. And you can go down to the elections department just to be sure and register there, but you're okay. But to the question, and the spirit of the question, you won't be surprised that that information is not widely shared. And in a state that imprisons more of its own than any other state in the Union, in a country that imprisons more of its own than any other country on the face of the planet, and the population looking nothing like the population of America, it's disproportionately black and brown and there for non-violent crimes, then you begin to understand when we talk about, or I should give credit where it's due, when Stacey Abrams talks about Jim Crow 2.0 and about this attack on voting rights for some Americans, particularly black and brown Americans, it also includes the criminal justice system. So let's make sure that we share that with the people in our lives. You're off paper, you're good to go, you can get registered to vote. Thank you for asking. Appreciate it.
Hey, I wanted to say thanks for being here, and I wanted to make a comment just for everybody here in the room. I grew up in East Texas, in Rusk County, actually, all my entire life. And this is not the question, but I want to make a statement. I know we see a lot going on in the world on TV and everywhere, but where I grew up, where we grew up, this is a whole other world because we love our brothers and sisters, so we don't care. Black, white, brown, whatever. I'm just saying, East Texas is a different place from the rest of the world because we got all our brothers and sisters here. I guess my question is, speaking on, with regards, you see it, it's all over the news, and I know you've been dubbed at times or whatever, and I know if you watch certain things, they talk about gun rights and things like that. Well, you know, I like to hunt, and I do things like that, and I just like to get, you know, an answer to the question because, you know, law-abiding citizens, I bet a lot of us in this whole room that had guns, our granddaddies and our parents, and we were taught what to do with them, how to be responsible. You know, we like to shoot, when we shot squirrels and we ate them. Just want to know where your stance is on that, because I think you get you know, sometimes in the media, big black eyes, you're just here to take everybody's things away and this and that and the other. I'm the biggest gun safety advocate and controls that there is, but I also like to shoot squirrel every now and then, or whitetail when I get a chance.
Yeah, great.
So, thank you for your time.
Thanks for being here, and thank you for the question. You know, I think you described Texas, or the experience of a lot of us in Texas. My great uncle was a sheriff's deputy. He was the captain at the El Paso County Jail, in fact, and he taught, you know, my dad, and then he taught me how to shoot, and gave us our first guns, the O'Rourke kids, and then taught us that responsibility and that accountability that comes with owning a firearm and the uses of that firearm. You know, with Uncle Raymond initially it was target practice, and then it was hunting, and then we had a firearm in the house for self-defense. And I think that's a pretty common story across Texas, and one that we're proud of. I mean, as you mentioned, we're pretty responsible with our firearms by and large. And in fact, until this legislative session, we had one of the better license to carry laws in the country. In order to carry a firearm in public, according to Texas law, until I guess today or yesterday, you had to go through some training, you had to go through a background check, and then you had to get a license, right? And some due diligence. Not perfect, but it kept a lot of people who shouldn't have a gun in public from carrying them in public. In fact, last year, 6,000 of our fellow Texans were denied a license to carry a firearm because they failed that due diligence and that background check. So all 6,000 of them now, free to go. The thousands more who knew better than to even try to get a license to carry a firearm because they wouldn't have passed the background check, they're good to go as well. And that should give us some pause. And you know, there's this whole political debate that's just silly about who backs the blue and who likes cops more than the other. You know, police officers and police chiefs pled with the governor not to sign this bill. It's going to make them less safe. It's going to make their job a lot harder. And he ignored them. Then he took $250 million out of the criminal justice department to put it in a wall on the southern border. So just to add insult to injury. So you asked what I believe in. Definitely making sure that you require at least a permit, background check, and some training to carry a firearm in public. A background check at a minimum to own a gun at all. You know, the guy who shot up a bunch of people and killed 7 of them in Midland, Odessa, a month after the El Paso shootings in 2019, he was able to purchase a gun legally without a background check because it was a private gun sale. Make that background check applicable. Have gun safety laws. You mentioned you're big on gun safety. Gun storage. You know, if you got kids in the house, want to make sure they can't get their hands on the gun. Nobody wants their kids to have their hands on the gun. Unfortunately, far too often in Texas, the kids do, and they end up hurting themselves or a friend or somebody else in the family. Have an extreme risk protection order. So if someone is not acting right and it looks like they're posing a danger to themselves or posing a danger to someone else, and